So this is part of the Launch Your Life series that Bridge to Wellbeing is putting on. And today, what I thought we'd talk about are resumes. We'll get into some of the more obvious aspects of a resume. Why do you have it? What are some tips and characteristics of maybe a more effective resume? And then I thought since we have the computer here with us and everything, I thought we would actually go online, pull up a couple of job postings here in the local area, and then talk about how we can incorporate certain aspects of the information that's readily available to us in the job posting and put it into the resume. So one of the assumptions I am making here today is that you either have a computer or you have access to a computer through the Y, through a library, through a friend, because in the modern day and age, virtually every job you're going to apply for it online. I'm just taking a quick scan around, and fortunately for you, I don't think there's anyone here as old as I am. When I was younger and new to the workforce, I would have, like anyone else in society at the time, I would have a resume. I would have a single piece of paper that told anyone about me, and I would type it up on a typewriter, and I usually have to type it 3 or 4 times because you make one mistake and you have to white it out and go back over again. Then I take it someplace where they make photocopies. Then I would put it in the mail. I would lick a stamp. I would handwrite on the envelope, and I would send out that resume to an employer who is typically advertising for a job in a newspaper want ad or something like that. And to most of you, that probably seems strange and archaic, because now you just go online, you put in a keyword search in a city where you want to work, and hundreds of jobs pop up. And you can apply by attaching a resume. So compared now to many, many years ago when I was initially in my first job searches, there's such wonderful ease to tailor your resume for the specific job you're applying for. So if you apply for 10 jobs, you may very conceivably have 10 different resumes. They may not be drastically different from each other, but it's not like when I was younger and I would send out the same resume for each job. And it's no wonder that wasn't a very successful way of doing things, because while I thought I may have been a really good candidate for the job, my resume may not have effectively aligned to it. So we're going to talk about the resume. I thought we'd also go over some interviewing aspects, and then we'll reserve some time for some question and answer. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, feel free to raise your hand. If something I said wasn't clear, or if you wanted me to give you greater detail or you didn't understand it, let me know. So we will reserve some time for a Q&A afterwards. And I actually don't fly back to Virginia. My flight doesn't leave till almost 1 a.m. this evening, tomorrow morning technically. So I'm willing to spend as much time here as you want. So again, it's my privilege to be here. So any questions you have are wonderful. I will tell you, I am prone to telling a lot of stories. And sometimes the stories relate to the subject matter and sometimes they don't. But that's just a little warning that you get up front. So from time to time, I'm going to be asking you some questions. I'll be up front. None of the questions I'm asking you are trick questions. So if they seem very obvious and simple, that's okay. So don't be afraid to answer any questions. So I'll start off with really the most basic type of question. Why do you have a resume in the first place? Anyone? I guess the food's really good. Yes? That is absolutely the correct answer. We actually, you have a resume to get the interview, right? But the resume is a necessary step in order to obtain the job that you want. So that might seem very simplistic, but when you think of it in those terms, it really puts importance on the resume. We're really kind of in a fortunate time right now. The economy is significantly increasing. Unemployment rates are at almost historic lows. And I was doing some research when looking for some local jobs in the area to use as examples for tonight's conversation. And I think Deborah may have reached out to some of you and asked what are some jobs that you're interested in. So I was doing a little bit of research, and I came across one article. It was absolutely from Forbes magazine, and they said that Colorado Springs is the 16th best city in the entire United States for job seekers right now. So you're in a fortunate location, in a fortunate time where the overall national economy is going really well. But nevertheless, anytime you ask for a job, it is a competitive process. As an employer, the employer is engaging in a little bit of risk taking. They don't necessarily know who they're going to be hiring. And of course, because they're running a for-profit business, they want to hire the best person that they think they can get for the job. So when you apply for a job, you are in competition with others. So again, it just goes back and reinforces why it really is important to have a very effective resume. And hopefully we can go over a few things related to your resume this evening that will help out. So here are some resume tips. The first, and again, if some of these seem obvious, that's all right. Try to fit your resume to a page. If it's going to be more than a page, try to keep it to maybe like about a page and a half. All right, that's why I also put in parentheses there, add a cover letter followed by a question mark. Usually the online application for jobs nowadays are pretty thorough, where you can already type in freehand some information about yourself. So I'm not really a big fan for a cover letter. Somebody else may give you coaching otherwise. You may feel differently. You're free to do whatever you want. But just letting you know from personal experience, the amount of time that recruiters and hiring managers and other people involved in the hiring process typically spend screening a resume is so brief that I prefer not to use a cover letter and go straight to a resume that starts off. And if you look on, I think it's the second page of the handout you have, I offered up just a sample resume. We will project that on the screen, and Deborah afterwards will also email you a Word document with that same sample resume, so you don't have to create one from scratch. You could just overtype your own information. But you'll notice that the resume that I prefer to use and to see starts off with a summary. So this is maybe an exciting or not so exciting sentence or two that you get to lead your resume off with. It's the first thing that catches somebody's eye, because again, the amount of time that people spend screening resumes is very, very brief. So that's why you want to keep your resume brief as well. That's why you should only be adding relevant experience and tailoring the information that you do decide to put into the resume to the job at hand. All right? So what I have here, and this is where we'll go online a little bit. Deborah sent me a couple of different types of jobs that she thought some people might be interested in. This very first job here is for a substitute teacher. The one thing with most substitute and any teaching jobs, they typically require a certificate, a teaching certificate. So that's something you may not have. Maybe you're striving to work towards that, or if you have one. So here is a job posting in the Colorado Springs area. The Colorado Division of Youth Services at Zebulon Pike Youth Services are looking for a long-term substitute teacher. Not a bad gig if you can get it, $22 an hour, right? So that's going to be a competitive job. You work from 7 to 3. So only on weekdays, so it sounds like a nice job, right? What you do is you go through and you pull out some of the key aspects that the employer is already telling you that they want to see in a candidate, and you try to deliberately put that into your resume. So again, if you look at that sample I gave you, anything that matches your experience should go in that summary, and then you should also list that in your skills. So some of the things that they're talking about, you must have appropriate teaching license. So if you have that, you must be able to work in a secured facility, pass a background check, and a drug screen. Well, the federal government is an extremely large employer in the Colorado Springs area. You may have worked for them in the past or currently work for them, and maybe you already have a security clearance and you've passed a background check. That's something that you can point out in the resume up front. Substitute teachers are responsible for filling in for short-term absences and long-term absences. They deliver instruction, grade assignments, take attendance, and lesson plan for long-term assignments. So you may already have some type of teaching experience. So that's it for this resume that you put together when you apply for this job. You should really highlight that. The other thing that's really important is don't sell yourself short. You may have a lot of applicable experiences, even if they're not professional experience. Just by a quick show of hands, who's ever taught a Sunday school lesson? Right? Church is an excellent source of some experience, especially teaching experience. So if you've been a teacher, you can say, I'm an experienced teacher. You don't necessarily have to say it's at XYZ church Sundays 2 years ago, but you can honestly say, I'm an experienced teacher. I have experience preparing new and unique curriculum for the class, meaning I've made stuff up, or you may have experience delivering from a teacher's manual. If you have both, state both, because that's what they're looking for. They want you to deliver instruction and also lesson plan. So that's just an example where if you take just those few key words and incorporate it into the resume and use that real life experience that you have, I think you'd be much more competitive for the role. All right. I didn't want to spend too much time, but I thought I'd pull up just a couple other jobs. So here's one. A job that some of you expressed some interest in was an administrative assistant. So here's a front office manager at a law firm here in Colorado Springs. And one of the things that, when I was doing my research, that caught my eye was the very first sentence up here. It says, please read all of this. There are keys to unlock for this unique position. So here the employer is telling you up front what they want in a candidate, and you'd be really remiss not to take them up on it and to incorporate that. So if we scroll down here a little bit, it tells you what the ideal candidate will do. It says we're on the hunt for an exceptional, out-of-the-box thinking front office person to help with our rapidly expanding law firm. The role is relevant opportunity. That's kind of a long posting. It gets here. Here we go into some areas over here. So 3 to 5 years, or have incredibly fanatic desire for providing office management. So they're telling you they would prefer to have somebody with 3 to 5 years experience, but if you're really super enthusiastic about it, they're willing to waive the years of experience. They use some words that aren't really common, like fanatical and obsesses, but obsesses in delivering client happiness. Now, this is just a personal irritation for me. I really don't like to see in resumes people who say, I'm a people person. I don't really know what that means. So you could be very polite as you're picking somebody's pocket. I don't know, you're a real people person. So, but you know, there's other ways of saying how you get along well with people. And that's for you to think about it and put that into your resume. So you can say, I'm an effective listener, I'm a problem solver, but give an example of how you've listened effectively and have solved problems. Maybe some of you have been involved in dispute resolution at work, at church, or in families, or through counseling or anything like that, all the different volunteer experiences you may have experience with. So here's another one, scrappy. Are you scrappy? So again, this is just one of hundreds of jobs out there. I just wanted to show that one to you. So when we talk about your resume, this may seem counterintuitive, but less information is better. And that just goes back to trying to keep it within one page. Now, just because it's less information doesn't mean it should be useless information, right? It shouldn't be short just for the sake of being short. What this requires from you is to think about what's the best way to share my skill or my experience in just one sentence. So it kind of forces you to really put a lot of thought into it and to keep it brief. Again, this is where my stories may not connect to the subject matter here. But when I asked how many of you have Sunday school teaching experience, there were several hands up there. One of the things that I love about the scriptures is they say so much in so little, right? So you can get one sentence and teach an entire Sunday school lesson. Heck, there are people who have written whole books on a single sentence from the scriptures. Well, try to make your resume like that. I know that's kind of hard part. Your resume doesn't have to be like the scriptures, but it's just that analogy of getting a lot of information into a short amount of space. Here we have, don't worry about your GPA or every award you focused on. For some of us, I'll talk about myself personally, it's been a long time since I've been to school. So I don't know how relevant my grade point average is. But rather than focusing or not focusing on your grade point average or the award, focus on the experience or the advantages that the degree, your schooling, or that certification that you have creates for you as a potential employee for the employer. So in other words, how are you going to use, or how do you think you can use, what you've learned in the workplace? So I'm going to share with you in a minute my wife's resume as an example. My wife didn't finish college. We got married very young. We had a child very young, and we were both in college when we first got married. And unfortunately, we could only afford, with both of us working a full-time job, one tuition. And I was the one who finished the degree. My wife is one of the most exceptional, talented people, and she has literally, when we have moved from town to town, she's identified places she wants to work, and she goes in there and she gets a job whether they're hiring or not, because she's got excellent experience. And so her lack of degree has never prevented her from finding meaningful, fulfilling employment. Because again, it's not the degree that makes you competitive, it's what you've learned from it and how you apply those concepts. So if you think in terms of how do I create value, that really doesn't necessarily have, that's not automatically the case just by virtue of having a degree. Now, when we talked about the substitute teacher, you do need a teaching certificate. So the certificate or the degree may be a requisite in some jobs, but maybe not in everything. Use action verbs in the past tense to demonstrate what you've already done. So I don't know if you've heard this, and I'll probably butcher it because I've heard it said a few different ways, but the best predictor of future behavior, if you want to know how somebody is going to behave in the future, is their past performance or their past behavior, right? Because we tend to be the same people over the years. Change is very difficult for us. So if you can show somebody that you have successfully been an administrative assistant, helped run an office, been outgoing and helpful to clientele and to people, you need to say what you've actually done. It's much better to state what you've done rather than what you might be able to do, because the employer is already taking a gamble by hiring somebody that they don't know. So you can help reduce that risk for them by talking, or in this case, writing in terms of your resume in the past tense. Tell them what you've already done, not what you hope to do. All right. And then, like I mentioned before, most people spend 30 to 90 seconds per resume. That you might find that to be shocking, but in business, it's fast moving. There's a lot of resumes, and these are even the resumes that get through because some companies use software that will screen for keywords or experiences. Some, they may say, I only want somebody with a certain degree from a certain type of school. But other ones they'll look for, if you're applying for an administrative assistant role, the software may scan and see how many times the phrase administrative assistant appears in your resume, presuming that, if you've been one before, you'll list that several times. So that's another reason why you need to go back to the posting and incorporate the words that they use. You just don't want to copy it, you want to incorporate it as often as you can into your resume. But once it clears the software, once it comes across somebody's computer screen, they're typically looking to hire somebody right away. This is probably pretty obvious to everyone, but most employers, if not all employers, in a for-profit situation, they're not hiring somebody just to have somebody there. They're hiring somebody, they're paying, they're providing benefits. It's an expense. It costs companies money to hire people and to employ them. So they're not going to hire somebody if they don't have to. So clearly there is a need for them to do that. And presumably they're going to be losing money, the productivity of that person, every day that job goes unfilled. So that's why they're trying to fill that job as soon as possible. So another reason to keep that resume brief and concise, because many companies do not spend a lot of time on it. So what I thought I'd do here is just bring up a sample resume. I mentioned the sample resume that I had handed out, and that looks like this. So, very generic, you just put your name in there. Not only did I just give this to you as an example, but I put into the text what this area should be. So again, the summary, it says provide a brief overview of your work experience, the number of years of experience, a short description of your job title or duties from other employers. So you want this to be like a greatest hits summary of who you are. And right here I said keep it under 10 lines. Well, this is what 10 lines looks like on the page. That's actually kind of a lot. So you'd probably be better off keeping it even much under 10 lines. I'll show my wife's here in just a minute where this template actually comes from her resume. So I'm just not making something up. This is her, something that she actually uses. And then when we talk about your skills, this is where you link back to that job posting online. So one of the job postings is the third one. We didn't get to it. It talked about you being innovative. So here in the Colorado Springs area, a lot of technology companies, because there's government contracts with the Air Force and the military, very high-tech area that you're in here. So they're innovative-based companies. Well, what comes to mind when you think of innovation? A lot of people think of innovation as thinking of something or creating something that otherwise doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And that's not necessarily what is meant by innovation. So if you think of innovation as being a flying car or a Harry Potter invisibility cloak, right? It doesn't exist. What employers are looking for is how have you taken something that exists elsewhere, but you incorporated it into your life or your work? So how have you taken a good idea from someplace else and brought it into the work? Because if you've done that for yourself, if you've done that for another employer, you're more likely to be able to do it for them as well. All right? So I hope that makes sense. But that's where you may want to say, one of my skills is I am an innovator. You're not going to necessarily say how you've innovated. That will go down here in your job experience. So when I worked for this job, I innovated by taking a technique that I was familiar with in another industry, but brought it into my role as an administrative assistant. And this other skill I obtained in another job. So again, this can be just as brief as I'm showing it to you in the sample. And to prove that it actually works, this is my wife's resume. And this is what she brings in. We've moved several times over the years. And like I said before, she'll find an optical shop that is nice and clean. It's near our home, so she doesn't have anywhere to work. And they may not be hiring. But she comes in, hands them the resume, and says, hey, this is my experience. You can't afford not to hire me. And she's gotten a job every time she's wanted to get a job. So I left address, cell phone, and email blank. I took that off of hers. She already gets too many phone calls and emails from people telling her how lucky she is to have me and things like that. So I don't want to inundate her anymore. So I took that out. But other than that, you know, here she says she's got 15 years combined office management and customer support experience. Her skills, very briefly, right? These are high-level bullet points because, again, somebody's scanning that. I'm an experienced office manager and I'm detail-oriented. She has experience in billing and quality and compliance. So if you're in a doctor's office, it's all about the billing, right? You have to bill it back to the insurance companies and you have to do it legally. You don't want to get in any trouble. So that's why she knows that's important to them. So she included the word compliance. She has talent assessment skills because she was a manager. So talent assessment means she's able to assess the people that she supervises and help them grow and develop and become more effective. And she has customer orientation, being in sales. That's something that is really, really important. So there's just a real life example of taking that template that is in your handout and that we'll email to you and it being put into practice in real life. Are there any questions so far about any of this that anyone might have?
How long does your resume need?
Again, I would keep it to a page, no more than a page and a half. Okay, so we've talked about the reason you have a resume is so you can get the interview. So logically following, why do you interview? You interview to get the job. So congratulations to you if you've made it this far into the process. It tells you that your resume and your personal experiences have distinguished you and you've been more successful than other people competing for the same job. Now, one thing I didn't mention, because employers are trying to fill roles very quickly, you may apply for a job that's already been filled. Or because of government requirements. So again, in your area, very large military and technology companies, the federal government has a rule that anytime you have more than, I think it's like $50,000 worth of contracts with the government, that you have to meet certain employment standards, affirmative action plans that require you to post your job in certain areas, certain websites or with certain groups or locations where it's physically put up to attract the maximum number of diverse candidates, right? They are required to do that by law, and this just goes to show you government doesn't necessarily think very well. They're required to post it even if they have somebody in their company that they're going to promote into that position. And they have to do that because they have a government contract. So the only reason I bring that up is don't get discouraged if you don't hear back on every single job that you might apply for, okay? Yes, you have a question?
So let's say that you're doing the interview.
Yes.
So how should you stand out while you're doing the interview? Should you know what she talked about what she said in the resume? Or?
Okay. I don't have a compulsion to repeat everything, but I was told because of the microphone I have to repeat all your questions. So a great question was asked about how should you approach the interview, and I'm going to hold off from answering that right now because that's everything that we're going to talk about next, okay? So you have an interview in order to get the job or a second interview, whatever might be the next step. So some of the very first things that you do when you get there, you want to dress to impress. So you want to dress for the job. Now, I used to work for a mining company. It was literally a hole in the ground in the Mojave Desert in California. I don't know if any of you have heard of US Borax or the 20 Mule Team. I think you got to be a little bit closer to my age to remember that. But it was a mining company. And when I got to the interview, one of the very first things the interviewer said to me was, "Oh, you're wearing a suit." And I was literally the only guy wearing a suit. And I'm in a manufacturing environment, and part of the interview included a tour of some of the operating areas of the mine. And I had to take off my wedding ring, I had to take off my tie, because we're near moving equipment. If your tie gets caught, you'll be decapitated, and you don't want that to happen, especially before you get the job and you don't have that insurance. So in that case, I overdressed. So it is perfectly okay when that recruiter calls you up and says, "We would like to invite you in for an interview. Can you be here at 3 o'clock on Wednesday?" And you say, "Yeah, I can squeeze that in." It's okay to then say, what's the proper attire for the interview? Because you never know. More than likely, it's going to be business attire. You're going to want to dress nicely, but you never know. If you're in a manufacturing environment, they may want to say it's business casual, maybe something like I have on now, or jeans are okay. But when I interviewed at the mine, like I said, I had to take my tie off. They slapped a hard hat on me, gave me safety glasses and gloves, and off we went, because one of the guys that I was interviewing was out in a trailer like 2 miles away from the main office. So you never know. So there's no harm in asking. And then this way you'll always get it right if you just ask. Smile. This may seem like a very simple and obvious thing, but there's actual scientific evidence to support that smiling is very, very important. That when you smile, and it's hard to talk about this without smiling to prove it. You can all smile yourselves and feel it in your face. But when you smile, there are certain muscles around your eyes that I don't know if the proper term is constrict or contract. But anyhow, the muscles move and they reshape your eyes differently than when you don't have a smile. Well, scientists have discovered that when your eyes react to your own face smiling, that you are several times more perceived to be more credible and honest than somebody who's not smiling. So that's probably why politicians do a lot of smiling, right? Because it's hard enough to believe them anyhow, but if they weren't smiling, I guess their eyes would be kind of flat and we wouldn't believe them at all. But there's actual, again, proof that smiling works to develop your credibility and your honesty and your likability. So it's very important to go smile. Another aspect here is to greet everyone as if they were making the hiring decision. Some companies, the company I work for is one of them, will have a foyer area where sometimes people come, they check in, they get their temporary visitor badge to come into the building, and they sit on a nice leather sofa, and they may have to be there for a few minutes until somebody comes out and invites them back. And inevitably, at the end of the day, we will ask the person who sits at the front desk, "How did our candidates do today?" And they will say, "Mr. Smith was really nice. Mr. Jones was a bit of a jerk." And we rely, as soon as you're in the building, you're in the interviewing process, whether you know it or not. So treat everyone with respect and as if they're making the hiring decision, because almost every single person you come in contact with during the interview experience is going to be asked for feedback on how you did. And then shake hands firmly and with eye contact. So don't break their hand, but don't give them the dead fish handshake either. All right. The other thing is what I talked about before when we talked about your resume. So this goes back to your question a little bit about speaking to the resume. If you word your resume in the past tense, you are writing about actual firsthand experiences that you've had. So similarly, That's how you should be talking during the interview, all right? So talk in the past tense and share real life experiences that you've had. So most employers will use what we call behavioral interview questions. These are questions that usually start off with, tell me about a time when, and then they'll fill in the blank. So a question might be, tell me about a time where you didn't get along with somebody at work. How did you address it? How did you resolve it? How did you manage to work successfully even though maybe you didn't like somebody, right? Or they'll say, tell me about a time where you think you made a really difficult decision. What was difficult about it and why did you make that decision instead of another decision? Because again, it goes back to the employers trying to minimize the risk in who they hire. And the other thing, and this may again sound very, very obvious, but there's an infinite number of questions somebody can ask you. Why are they asking you these questions? They're asking you these questions because they're trying to see if you have a skill, an experience, or an aptitude towards some aspect of the job that's important for the job. So we talked about innovation. So you're going to apply, even if it's as an administrative assistant at an innovative technology company. You may want to be prepared to share an experience where you've made an improvement on something. And it may be something mundane. It may be something that you've just done at home. I'm going to show my age. I guess nowadays they call it a life hack, right? You've turned something into something better, right? That's an example of being innovative. So that's where you get to share an experience where you have already innovated. I'll tell you the worst interview question I have ever been asked in my career. I don't even remember what the job was I was applying for. I've been in HR, so it's probably an HR-related job. And the interviewer says, let's pretend that you are planning the first manned mission to Mars. What items would you bring with you? And I thought, really? Am I interviewing at NASA? I don't get it. So, I gave them an explanation of, the different things I would bring. I guess they were trying to think about my thought processes. And I didn't get the job. My dismay of their question may have showed up on my face, but it might be on the list of things I said I would bring. I said, well, I would bring a gun with one bullet. And she didn't get it. I'm like, who wants to be stuck? What if something goes wrong while you're on your mission to Mars? You don't want to be floating around in space for years. So, she didn't get it, but I didn't get the job either. So, but, that's where, you're probably not going to be encountering hypothetical questions. Unless you are interviewing to be the project manager for the next manned mission to Mars and you've applied at NASA, you're probably not going to encounter that type of question. So, and also you're probably not applying for a job that no one's never done before. So chances are this is a job people have done before and they want to see what your experiences have been that align to that. Again, I'm repeating myself. It's simple, it's obvious, but it is absolutely critical that you answer the question. I can't tell you how many times I've had wonderful, delightful conversations with people. At the end of the conversation, I know what their children's sporting events are. I know the name of their pet. I know where their favorite vacation spot is. We have these wonderful conversations, but I don't know whether they can do the job because they told me about their pet, their children's skating activities, and their favorite place to go on vacation. The reason I'm asking you a question is because, presumably, it relates to the job you're applying for. So that's why it's so important to answer the question. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You want to give the best, most substantial response that you can. But it's better to give a common or simplistic response than no response at all. Again, when I was working at the mine in California, we were going through a large expansion and we were hiring a lot of people. And everyone would start as a laborer. That was the rule. Everyone came in as a laborer, then as different positions, a truck driver or a packaging person or an equipment operator came up. It was a union job, and then you would bid, and the senior-most person would get the first job that they wanted. But everyone had to come in as a laborer. So I was interviewing 2 people for the last job, and there was one gentleman who had many, many years of extensive heavy equipment experience. And at the mine, we had trucks where literally the tire was as large as this wall. And you could probably fit this entire room in the bed of the truck. So it was huge equipment. And it's equipment that really doesn't exist anywhere outside of the mine. So we don't really expect people to know how to drive it. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So we're expecting up front to train you to proficiency and to learn how to drive this truck. Well, this one gentleman already had that type of experience. So I'm thinking, wow, that would save us some time and some money, and he might be a good candidate. The other person, and again, this is a small town in the Mojave Desert. It was the town of Boron. You could look it up. Anyone ever see the movie Erin Brockovich? That's the town with the poisoned water, okay? So it's actually the neighboring town, but it's in the middle of the desert. And the other candidate was a waitress at the local restaurant. So I've got a heavy equipment operator applying for a mining job, and I've got a waitress applying for the same job. So because it's a mine and there are no small accidents, when there's accidents, people get really hurt and sometimes they die. It was critically important to us to hire people that were very safety-minded. So I would ask every single candidate, tell me what you do on a regular basis to live and work safely. And the best answer the heavy equipment operator could give me was that he always put his seatbelt on when he was operating the heavy equipment. And I thought that was really kind of strange. You would think operating equipment for years, you would be a safety professional, and you would know to even adjust your mirrors, to walk around your vehicle to make sure there's no one there before you get in and you operate it. You could put blocks or chocks under your wheel, because equipment that size, if it starts rolling, nothing's going to stop it. It will go through the building and won't stop for another mile or something like that. And all he could tell me was that he wears his safety belt. So then I asked the waitress a question, and I asked her the same question. What do you do to live and work safely on a daily basis? And she says, well, I have small children at home, so I keep all of my cleaning supplies and chemicals in the top shelf of a closet where none of my children can reach it. I also put safety locks on all the pantry doors so that they can't pinch their fingers. I have installed gates so that my youngest one won't tumble down the stairs. I make sure that I have the proper car seat that's rated for each child and their weight, and I took it down to the local sheriff's department just the other week, because the sheriff's department does free car seat inspections to make sure that I've secured the car seat properly. Who do you think I hired? I hired the waitress. So just because you may not have industrial grade safety experience doesn't mean you're not a safety-minded person. It can be something as simple as, you know what, I dispose of all my prescriptions when I'm done using them. I don't leave old drugs lying around my house. It can be anything. So that's where when you look at your resume and you put your skills, you may want to put, I'm a safety professional. And they may say, well, tell me how you're a safety professional. And if you could give a response even half as good as the waitress gave to me, then that's okay. It doesn't have to be that you are the lead safety monitor in a mining organization or in an industrial facility. All right? So again, it's important that you answer the question. You probably aren't clairvoyant, but you can still come prepared with potential responses. I think we have time. This is only like 90 seconds long. It's kind of a funny old video. Is anyone here old enough to remember Johnny Carson? So this is an old video from Johnny Carson. I don't know if you remember. He would have this bit where he would be introduced as Karnak the Incredible, and he would give the audience an answer before reading what the question was. So he would have these clairvoyant abilities, right? So here's Johnny. It's just a little fun little video. There we go.
Having trouble dividing this one? Sit boom ba, sit boom ba. Describe the sound made when a sheep explodes.
Okay. I thought that was hilarious. Nobody else laughed. Okay. I just have an old sense of humor, I guess. So the reason I bring this up is we don't expect you to be able to read the interviewer's mind, but it is really quite feasible and actually pretty simple to anticipate the questions that are going to be asked of you. And whenever we interview for a job, we always get nervous. I've interviewed for dozens of jobs, and I always get nervous. That's just human nature. One of the things that we can do is to anticipate what some of the questions might be. And you probably have, and if you were to sit down with a family member or a friend and just talk about what are some of your really great experiences that you've had either in life or on the job or at church or in the community, and anticipate what some of those things are. And what you'll find is that you will have a situation that you can use that will probably answer half a dozen different questions that the interviewer may ask you. So let's say you had an experience. I'm sure everyone here has had a tough day at work. So go home, talk to your spouse, your friend, your mother, and talk to them about what was your most difficult day at work. And then what are some of the lessons that you learned from that difficult day at work? So maybe you got in a fight with one of your peers. Maybe they said something disrespectful to you and it made you very upset. And you refrained from calling them a name back. And you went out of your way to say something nice. And you were able to get the job done. So if you have that type of experience, that could be the response that you share when the interviewer asks you about, tell me about a time when you didn't get along with somebody at work. Tell me about a time when you encountered a difficult situation, but you were able to get the job done. Tell me about a time where you were able to overcome an emotional situation and continue to generate good results. And so you don't necessarily know what the question is, but you know I've got this great experience. Maybe it wasn't great the day you had it, but it was great from a personal and an emotional development experience for you. And then if you could think of 2, 3, 4 of these type of experiences, you will already have the answer to almost all the questions that are going to be asked you. So just like Karnak gave the answer, sis boom ba, to the question, was the sound an exploding sheep makes? I still think that's funny. You can do the same thing with your interview questions. All right, so some questions you may want to ask yourself before you go, or some questions that may be asked of you is, what professional accomplishment are you most proud of? So talk about your best day at work, or think about your best day at work. What made you really fulfilled? Tell us about a time when you made a mistake, what you learned from it, and how you corrected the situation. It really depends on the mistake you made, as long as no one got hurt or you didn't embezzle thousands of dollars or something like that. But feel free to share a mistake that you've made. I can't really think of anyone who's really going to hold that against you, because when you share the mistake that you made, think about the different things you're telling the interviewer. One, you're telling them that you are a person of high integrity, that you are willing to admit when you've made a mistake. You're also being able to tell them what you learned when you made that mistake, and you're showing the humility of a person who is willing to make the changes necessary to not make that mistake again. And again, I've talked about things that are simple and obvious. And the most obvious statement anyone can ever make in the entire world is no one is perfect. Inevitably, no matter what job you get in the future, you're going to make mistakes. You know it, and the employer knows it. But if you use an example where you share a mistake that you made, communicate what you learned from it, and how you changed your behavior, how you learned from that mistake, now that sends so many positive signals to the interviewer, and it also lets them know that, gee, if you made that mistake in the past, you're less likely to make that mistake when I'm your employer. So there's actually an advantage. Now again, you may want to think about and be very selective about which mistake you want to share with somebody. One example, I made a mistake, again, going back to California. I was new to California, and they have completely different labor laws in California than any other place in the country. And one of the laws there is when you terminate somebody, you have to pay them in full at the time you terminate them. Most other states, if you make a mistake, if you get in a fight with somebody and say, hey, you're fired, you just pay them on their next regularly scheduled paycheck. Now, if they quit, you had 3 days to get them their pay. But if you decide to make the decision to terminate somebody in California, you have to pay them all their hours up until the moment that they worked, and you have to pay them on the spot. And that's an administrative hassle, and I didn't know about it. So somebody made a big mistake, and I had to inform them that they were terminated. And I went back and I informed my boss. I said, so-and-so, I did it, they're terminated, they're off the property. And he was so congratulatory at first. He goes, hey, how did you work out his how did you calculate his pay, the tax withholdings, and write him a check and get administration to do all those things to terminate him? I'm like, oh, you have to do that? So what ended up happening was I didn't do it properly, and it actually took us 3 days to do it properly, to calculate his pay. So I called him back in, and I gave him his paycheck, and we included the 3 days that it took us to calculate the pay, because that's the law. So that's an example where you made an honest mistake. Maybe I was overeager, but it also shows that you have high integrity when you're willing to pay for your mistake. Now, we would have paid him that time anyhow, because it would ordinarily take 3 days to process the check. So the company didn't really lose much money, or any money, but it's just an example where you could say, hey, I made a mistake, wasn't the end of the world, but now, if I should ever get a job in California again, they know that I know not to do that. So some other things are, tell us about a time when you used courage in the workplace. And that doesn't mean that you exercised courage to save somebody's life from falling machinery, or you ran into a burning building. Courage just might be having the courage to be honest with somebody. Courage may be able to say, no, I don't feel comfortable doing what you're asking me to do. I don't think it's ethical. So thinking about all these different things, nobody's going to know that better than you, and you can already come prepared to the interview with answers to these types of questions. Tell me about a time when you disagreed with somebody, maybe even your own supervisor, but you were able to work it out. Because again, no matter where you work, you will disagree with somebody. You will not get along with somebody. Somebody will have a bad day. So during your job interview, your job, again, is to answer the question. It's usually okay to take a few seconds to think about it. And this is another tip right here. Respond with your best experience to that question, not the most recent one. Because you're going to be nervous when you're interviewing, you may have 2 potential responses to a question. Tell me about a time where you thought you used courage, or tell me about a time when you made a mistake. If you're like me, you've got 100 examples to use. But you want to use the best one. Because we're nervous, we tend to think of the most recent one. And that may not be the best answer for you to use. It may not be a wrong answer, but it may not be the best one. So I've yet to come across anyone who, if you say, can you give me a few seconds to think about that? I want to make sure I give you the best response. And literally just think there for 3 or 5 seconds. Don't make it too long, but take your time and just don't shoot from the hip, okay? Because again, this is a competitive process. This is really, really important. And this is something that you can come prepared with before you ever arrive at your interview. You could have it written down in your notebook. But you should really ask your own questions. Most employers will give you an opportunity at the end of the interview and they'll say, are there any questions that you have for me? And there's a variety of different questions that I love to ask and encourage other people to ask. So for example, you may want to ask something like, why does this job exist? Because again, the job exists because the employer thinks it's going to create value. So let them tell you the value that they want to come from the job. You would never learn that otherwise if you didn't ask the question. Ask, how can the job contribute to the company's success? This is another good one. What do top performers in this job look like? So what do the best of the best do? So now if you get the job, you already know what the employer thinks good looks like, and you know to start at that level. You can ask for what are their expectations? What's the company vision? Right? So you may be applying for a role at a company that has a very boring, mundane product, like vinyl siding on a house, right? Is there anything more boring than a piece of plastic that gets tacked onto the side of a house? So you may feel strange asking the employer, what's your vision for the future? And they may say, well, I want to, I want to get different shades of beige for my vinyl siding or something like that. Or they might surprise you and they may say something like, well, we're working on different technologies where the siding has solar cells embedded into it, so the entire siding of your house can help generate electricity, right? And because in the job posting you saw where they were looking for innovation, that's where you can then say, well, let me tell you what I've done that I think is innovative. And it's certainly not going to be anything like putting solar cells into aluminum siding, but you can at least demonstrate that you are an innovative thinker and an innovative person. Or maybe they don't have any type of really glamorous, exciting type of technological advances for their vision. Maybe the vision for this company is that everyone goes home in the same condition that they arrived, that we are a manufacturing company and safety is really, really important to us. Well, now that the employer has told you what's important to him, you can then share with that person how you match up to what's important to them. So that's the next hint here. Have the courage to link back to those responses with your experience and how you can contribute. So if right there on the spot, you ask what is important to you, what is the vision or the goal of this company, and they say the goal is that every person goes home in the same condition they arrived. We are a safety-minded company. That's where you need to seize that moment and say, well, we really haven't talked much about safety. Can I tell you how I operate safely every single day in my current job or in my home or when I operate my vehicle? So that may take a little bit of courage to give them an answer to a question that they didn't even ask you. But it's a missed opportunity if you don't do it, okay? So that's why you come prepared with these different questions. So you get great insight into the job and you can distinguish yourself from other people because the questions you ask will say a lot about you. And then lastly, I just want to go over a couple of volunteer opportunities because volunteer opportunities are great ways of obtaining experience that you may not otherwise have. So there's volunteermatch.org, and this is in the handout. There's Springs Rescue Mission, so that's right here in Colorado Springs. It's a great way to build your resume and meet people. And then the other thing that you can get through volunteer opportunities is networking. As you learn about other entities and people and you get to know them, feel free to ask them, are there any job opportunities that you're aware of? Is there anyone within your network? So maybe this person isn't hiring, but they know somebody that is. So it's a great way to network. And then for finding jobs in your area, all those jobs that I went online and found and showed to you earlier, those all came from Indeed.com. So Indeed is a great online site. You have Monster, Career Builder, Craigslist. There's the Pikes Peak Workforce Center. And this is what I mentioned before. Don't feel defeated if several positions are gone. Some employers have to post a job even when it's been filled or they have plans on filling it internally. So if you think you're going to apply for one job and get that job, you're probably going to be disappointed. You're going to have to apply for a lot of jobs. And if you apply for 10, maybe you'll get 3 interviews. And of the 3 interviews, maybe you'll get 1 job offer. But that's how it works, all right? So that's the prepared portion of the presentation I had for you this evening. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes?
How would you address on your resume if you've been out of the workforce for 10 plus years?
Sure. So the question is, how do you address large gaps of time off where you weren't employed? So if you go back to that example, it just shows, what you did for a certain period of time. Fill that out. Employers will see a gap, but then maybe you can address that in your summary or in your skills. So, some people may have been a stay-at-home mom for a certain number of years. That may be your personal profile. I have, maybe I have 5 years experience in this industry prior to staying home and raising my family. I'm an experienced person with this degree looking to get back into the workforce and to leverage her experience doing X, Y, Z, what you used to do. So just be upfront with it. I think most people, it's usually probably pretty obvious that if there's a gap there, you were doing something else. So, if you were a stay-at-home mom, there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed about. We all know that's the toughest job of all. So bringing those experiences into the workplace is usually pretty positive. Any other questions? Yes? I couldn't hear you. What's that? Is it appropriate to put color? Do you mean race color or color color?
Like a color.
A color, okay. Yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of a computer. My first resume, it was all black and white, same font on a typewriter. The only difference was, some letters were capitalized. That was the only differentiation. I would say, yeah, make your resume look attractive. Use color, use different sizes, use different fonts. Some people like to have like a decorative square box and a line that goes down. That's okay, just don't make it excessive. It should be neat, it should be clean, and use it, because again, you want them focusing on you, not on the decorations on the resume. But yes, anything that will catch that person's eye, you should use. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, is there a specific?
Like how many years you've been working? You just put what you've done the past couple years.
It depends. So in the summary, like on my resume, the first line of my resume is 25 plus years of human resources and labor relations experience, because I have 25 years experience. Now, when I get into my experience where I carve out all of my past employers, I usually only go back a reasonable amount of time, like maybe 10 years. So let's say I've had 3 different jobs in the last 10 years. I'll list the most recent, the last one, and then the third one. if I were to list every job I've had over 25 years, I would be breaking the first recommendation I gave you of keeping it limited to a page. So, but that's why I say it depends. You may want to give more explicit detail over the last 10 years, and then another summary of the previous 15. And so, over the previous 15, I was like my wife, held various optometric or optical, I always have a difficult time saying that, various optical roles and responsibilities, just so that they know that all those years of experience are relevant to their industry. And then you can always speak to it in your interview. So again, when you answer questions, you're going to want to give the best response. My current job, working for Freedom Partners Shared Services, I've only been here for a little over a year. So fortunately, I haven't had a lot of time to make a lot of big mistakes. So I have to go back a few years when I talk about mistakes that I've made. So you can speak to that on the resume. Other questions? The hand came above the ear, so I thought that was a question. So that was just, oh, it wasn't, okay. Anything else? Don't be shy, yeah. She's mostly worked, I was asked what other fields has my wife worked in. I love my wife. She's a wonderful person. And like I said before, we were both working full-time jobs when I was going to college. And she worked a job that was just, it was like the first job that she could get. And it happened to be for an ophthalmologist who is, this is going back like 25 or 30 years when they were first doing laser surgery on people's eyes. And I think she was working the front desk, checking people in and checking their insurance. And then she just, after a few months there, they knew that she was a reliable person, and the doctor asked, would you be willing to help me set up my equipment and take people's measurements and things like that? And it just grew and grew and grew. And then she went on to be a lab manager at a LensCrafters manufacturing people's glasses. And then she became the store manager for that LensCrafters. So yeah, it wasn't any real plan. It was just very, something lucky that happened to be available at the time. Yeah. Any other questions? You've been a lovely audience. So thank you for letting me come out. Did I answer your question from earlier? Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I sincerely wish you all the best of luck in your job search. And if I could offer one little bit of advice, this may come across, I don't know how this will come across. Don't be too selective. If you're not working right now, don't be too selective in the job that you take, because it's always easier to find a job when you have a job. Okay? There are sometimes those gaps. So sometimes you may want to take a job in order to get a different job, and you have to be a little strategic and patient about it. So it's a great job market. I have every confidence that you'll be successful. Thank you very much.